the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
With uncommon courage, we must do justice, not only by protecting innocent preborn life, but by correcting injustice and rebuilding opportunities so that mothers and fathers can flourish. May we always realize that our wisdom and our strength is found by humbly seeking God's direction for the path ahead.
Benjamin Watson clip from the March for Life this year as we're talking about being a pro-life Catholic here on the Inner Life Today. Thanks for joining us. Let's say hello to our spiritual director, Father Carter Griffin. Father Griffin is the rector of St. John Paul II Seminary in Washington, D.C. Let's go to the phones. Julia is calling in from Nevada. Good morning, Julia. Thank you for calling.
Thank you so much for taking my call. How do you guys justify not getting an abortion in cases of where a woman is raped?
Thanks, Julia. It's a great question, and it's also brought up sometimes in a question of somebody conceived in incest or other ways that there can be, real injustices. And the first thing to point out is just that nothing that anyone is going to say is going to justify or should justify the rape itself, right? That is an injustice that is almost unspeakable, and somebody who commits that needs to be brought to justice. The question is what happens to the child, right? And the child who is conceived is, of course, not guilty of rape. As painful as it is to say it, it needs to be said that killing that child would also be an injustice. And so the innocence of the child, I think, one way to kind of think about this is that if the child had already been born, would the fact that the child had been conceived in rape justify killing the child? And of course, I don't think many people would say yes. But it's not an easy thing. And so there is clearly the need for justice, to be done there, and also an accompaniment for the woman in that period of giving birth to that child. Sometimes women who have children conceived in this way decide to have the child give up for adoption. But the fact is there's just no way around kind of the difficult statement to say that every child in the womb is innocent, and nothing can justify killing that child. So that would be how I would respond to that very difficult but very important question that you bring up.
Mm-hmm. And I think maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think a lot of times this question does come up, and it is a good question. Thank you for asking it, Julia. Thanks for calling in and asking the question. Is that it seems like, or it can seem like, in our modern society, the way that we think about, or I think we're influenced to think about things, that it seems like an injustice to the mother who is the victim of this horrible crime, right? I mean, it's so deeply violating in so many ways, not just physically, but in so many ways. And then it seems that now she's forced to carry this child to term. I mean, even if she decides to give it up for adoption. So, I mean, in the face of that, and maybe this gets into something we want to talk about anyway, Father, but of course we want to show compassion to this woman who has suffered this deeply horrendous violation, but at the same time, and to stand up for the life of the child within her womb as well. So any ideas or any ways in which we can talk about this with compassion while not deviating from the truth of God?
Well, I mean, I think even as you laid the question out, I think you've given an example of what needs to be done there, right? We have to acknowledge what is some of the very painful emotional truths, and also some of the ways of thinking about this and other issues that are kind of widespread today, and to sort of start where people are, right? And if we just jump right into some of the weeds and kind of, tackle these difficult issues without sort of laying a certain amount of foundation before that, it's going to be very hard to have a conversation when so many assumptions are already there. And the assumptions are not always accurate, especially if they're drawn from a wider culture, which is, often in favor of abortion and other anti-life measures. So I think we have to be very, very respectful of where people are, and also very conscious that we set the right tone, in conversations, that it's not just a question of kind of winning an argument or winning kind of political points, but actually acknowledging the care and the concern that we do have for the women involved and for others who are involved in abortions. I mean, even the doctors and the politicians and all those people who make it more possible for this to happen, I mean, they should still be in our prayers, and we should always be wanting to. There have been many, very, very significant converts among them who have become some of the greatest advocates for the pro-life movement. So my own point is that we have an attitude which is not one of condemning, not one of kind of just winning arguments. I think that there are oftentimes these underlying assumptions, or almost like a worldview, that people bring to these conversations, and sometimes, rather than going right into the thick of the argument or the discussion point itself, to kind of scale back a little bit. Like how do we look at human beings, right? I mean, what are some of the assumptions we're making about the dignity of human beings? And those assumptions may not be the same on both sides. And if so, then it's not going to do a lot of good to talk about something downstream when you have a very different view of even what human beings are. I think one thing that we can try to do is offer to read something together, or maybe even read something like each of you gives an article to the other person. Like that can often, I found that to be really helpful sometimes, because what it does is it sort of makes the discussion a little bit more, maybe not quite so emotional, say like in a family or something like that, where you can each look at something outside of yourselves and kind of talk about it. And sometimes that can lead to a more measured and kind of rational discussion. And I think, if the person is a Christian or is at least a believer, to try to start with prayer, vocal prayer out loud, or at least just in your own heart, praying to that person's guardian angel and your own, praying for wisdom, praying to the Holy Spirit for light. I think all of those are kind of different aspects that we can bring to these discussions. And mercy, right? We cannot fail to talk about mercy. Mercy for the child, mercy for the mother, mercy for those who make all of this industry possible.
Recognizing that the person who may be disagreeing with us has still been loved into being and carries the dignity of his or her own human life as well. And we need to stand up for his or her life as well. Yeah. Anyway, Julia, thank you so much for the call. Appreciate that. Good question. And we'll continue to speak about those types of things here on Relevant Radio and all of our different programs, I'm sure. So thank you for listening and thanks for calling in. Hi, this is Patrick Conley. You can join me and listen on the Relevant Radio app to The Inner Life, live each weekday at 11 a.m. Central. And thanks for listening.